And we are live. Hello, everyone. I'm Jessper Maquindang. If you're here to build a stronger team and a more effective company culture, you're in the right place. In each episode, our guests share tips, strategies, and insights to help you and your people thrive. And I'm very excited to introduce today's guest. Brandy Ferrer is the CEO of Pathfinder Strategies, an Amazon bestselling author and the creator of the Spark Leadership Program. With a career shaped by both thriving and toxic workplace cultures, she saw firsthand that what gets you promoted is not always what makes you successful. Today, she partners with HR leaders to develop confident, capable managers through customized coaching, workshops, and programs. Known for her practical, people first approach, Brandy helps leaders embrace their strengths, navigate challenges, and build teams that thrive. Let's welcome Brandy Ferrer. Brandy, great to have you on the show.
Yay, thanks for having me, Jessper. Excited to be here.
I'm very excited about today's topic, which is this bad boss and the path to better leadership. Brandy, I'd really like to know more about the research in the field. Can you share any statistics or data in the area?
Yeah, I'll share a few with you to start, and then I might pepper a few more in as we go. But kind of a shocking statistic that I found a few years ago was that 40% of new leaders fail within the first 18 months of moving into that position. So that's kind of like, that was like a slap in the face. I mean, I had my own experiences. I've worked with leaders for a long time, but to see that so starkly, I was like, wow. And then also, fun fact, 84% of people say they've had a bad boss at some point. So we've all suffered through the bad boss behaviors. Mostly all of us have suffered through at some point in our careers.
Excellent. And Brandy, I was looking at the research as well, and I wanted to get your perspective. And I found something from Business Wire, and they discovered that 82% of American workers say they'd potentially quit because of a bad manager. I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so that it reminds me of the old adage that people don't quit their jobs, they quit their managers. And that's, I mean, that's kind of true, right? That's what the statistics tell us, whether it's BizWire or whether it's Gallup, because we know that relationship between the manager and their direct report is probably the most important relationship professionally that direct report has. And it's one of the most important relationships actually in their life, with the exception of their partner.
That's a great perspective. And Brandy, I wanted to share one more statistic, and this one comes from the Peaceful Leaders Academy, and they discovered that only 16% of employees feel that their most recent manager conversation was deeply meaningful. I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I see this, Jessper, all the time in my work, where people were good performers, they're good, contributors. They move into management and they don't know how to manage, and not because they're not talented and not because they're not smart, but because they don't necessarily get the training or support or exposure to what is expected of them in that role. And that includes having conversations and feedback and coaching with their direct reports. So that is not a surprising statistic to me at all.
Excellent. Brandy, thank you for sharing your insights. Now, let's take a deeper dive into the topic, this idea of breaking the bad boss pattern. Brandy, I'd like to know your inspiration. Tell us about your journey of what brought you really into this field.
Yeah, so so my journey, actually, my leadership development and consulting journey started with my own experience as a bad boss. So just like a lot of people that we know, and probably a lot of people have had this experience, I was a great performer as an individual contributor. And I really wanted to move into management, because to me, management meant like cool title and cool business cards and an office and all these things. So I got that promotion, and the moment I stepped into that role, I was in over my head. I remember the day, Jessper, that my director came to me and he said, "Oh, and by the way, you also are in charge of performance management." And I was like, what is performance management? How do I do that? So it was a terrifying experience. It was a really steep scary learning curve to the tune of fist fights in my office and losing $10,000 for the company and all kinds of bad things. So fast forward a little bit further on in my own journey, I did get a coach, so thankfully that was helpful. But later on in my professional journey, I did some work with an EAP, and part of what I was responsible for was taking care of the management referral hotline. And it was so interesting, Jessper, that the people that would call, the managers that would call, were largely dealing with similar struggles to what I dealt with. They were facing the same challenges and struggling with confidence the exact same way that I was. And so I thought to myself, wow, this is not a unique experience, but no one's talking about it. So then when I moved into consulting, and I really started to delve deep into what creates these bad boss patterns, right? How does this stuff start? And it starts with, people being put into roles for which they're not prepared, and expected to perform. And we have ways to cope with that, right? But I'll get to that in just a few.
Absolutely. And Brandy, as we take a deeper dive into the topic, I was curious to know more about, on this topic of breaking the bad boss pattern, why is it important for other people to pay more attention to this?
Well, I believe the statistic from Gallup is that managers have 70% of the influence of, what is the statistic? Managers have 70% of the variance in employee engagement, and that's driven directly from their relationship. So if you have a bad boss, you're probably not going to have a great relationship with them. And the truth is that most people don't show up every day. Like, I can't wait to annoy my team members. I can't wait to be a bad boss. Most people want to do a good job. They want to do right by their teams, and they want to positively impact their cultures. But when individuals are put into roles for which they're not prepared and they don't have the support, it's really, really hard to do that, because now they're in this mode of, how do I survive, right? How do I make it look like I know what I'm doing, even though I really don't? And that's where we begin to see those bad boss patterns, right? We begin to see things like micromanagement, which is really a coping mechanism for loss of control, fear of failure, and avoidance of accountability. And these are the kind of behaviors that we see, and it makes our direct reports look at us and be like, oh, Brandy's a bad boss, when in fact, I'm just trying to learn how to do my job effectively, and not necessarily getting everything I need to be successful.
Brandy, that's a great perspective. I wanted to get your thoughts further into that. I was curious, with the bad behaviors that we do see, do leaders tend to fall into them unintentionally? Are they unaware? What tends to happen in those situations?
Yeah, I think it's definitely unintentionally. Like I said, most of the people that I work with, and most of the people that I've experienced in my career, actually want to be as supportive and be really great in their role. It's just a lot of it is a matter of not having the confidence, right, and feeling uncertain. So, for example, when I was promoted into a management position for the first time, my thought process was, okay, well, clearly leadership sees something in me, right? So I should just know how to do this. And I'm not going to raise my hand and say that I need help or I have questions, because that's going to take away from my credibility. And that's going to make my bosses think that I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm just going to figure it out. And that, of course, very rarely works effectively, because it takes some time, especially if you're moving from a position of individual contributor into a position of now you're managing people for the first time. That is a tremendous shift.
Brandy, what can businesses and organizations do to really support these leaders in growing into becoming better managers and leaders?
Yeah, I love this question. So there's several things, starting with I like to call it the warm body syndrome, right? So often what happens in business is there's a business need, and there's a warm body. And we think that those things are a natural match, and they're not. So just because the business is growing or the company is growing and you've got someone who is a great individual contributor doesn't mean that's going to be a natural move for them. So when you're looking at promoting internally, I think it's really important to think about what is that person's potential, that not just their past performance, and then making sure that that individual has exposure to what the role truly is. It's always surprising to me, Jessper, how often people are promoted and they genuinely have no idea what their manager did before them. So we have to do better at, letting people job shadow us and come to meetings and, really acting up when the manager is out and allowing, that frontline person to fully step into that role and get that exposure. I think being really clear on expectations is also important. I had a conversation with a client. She's been in a management role now for just over a year. And when we first started talking, she looked at me and she said, Brandy, I'm not joking. I really don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know how often I should be having one-to-one conversations. I don't know the best way to manage the people management stuff coupled with the special projects things that I have to do. So being super clear, even to the point of like, here's how many one-to-one conversations that you need to be having. Here's what those conversations should comprise of. That is all important. And then making sure that the person who steps into that management or leadership role has support. And that support could be human resources. It could be that person's leader. It can also be their peer group. And I think that's an opportunity that gets often overlooked. Like a lot of times managers don't necessarily think about looking to another manager in another area of the company to ask questions like, hey, how do you have these conversations? How do you handle, your calendar and things like that? And I'll just kind of, I'll cut this off at the pass because a lot of the pushback I hear on that particular part is, well, we just don't have time. We just don't have time to offer that level of support. And if that is truly the case, then you got to get that new manager a coach. You got to, turn to your EAP because oftentimes EAPs have some really great training that's available for managers. Even if it's external, get that person that support. It is an investment, but it's still going to be cheaper than management turnover or employee turnover for sure. And of course, making sure that manager is set up for success, not only in terms of their performance and their team's performance, but also in terms of the impact that managers have on their culture.
Brandy, those are some excellent points. I was curious to learn more within that. I was curious, Brandy, what are some of the warning signs that we should pay attention to before we consider promoting someone or moving them up to a higher leadership or management position?
Yeah, I love this question. One of the things that we do in the Spark Your Leadership program, and we do it before the program even starts, is we talk about what is really the role of an individual contributor, a manager, and a leader. And let's have an honest conversation about whether or not that role is truly for you, because sometimes it's not. I had a conversation with somebody recently, and she has tapped the ceiling of as far as she's going to go in her career as an individual contributor. Her only next step is management. And she said to me, I don't want to manage people. So I think it's really important for people to understand what that looks like, what that role truly looks like before stepping into it. Another thing that I think that companies can do, and I'm seeing this happen more, which is to have an alternative track for growth that does not involve people management. I worked with an accounting firm that has this. So they have a technical track. If you want to be an individual contributor, you have built-in growth milestones, and you can continue to progress your career, or you can go by way of people management. And both have opportunities for growth and development along the way, which is brilliant.
Excellent. And I was curious, now let's say that leaders have taken the time, they put in the effort to make progress. I was curious to learn, how can leaders keep growing once they've made some changes? How can we sustain that?
Yeah, I think there's the answer to that question is there's no end, right? Like, I believe that we're all works in progress, right? We all have things that we're inherently good at. We all have things that we can always continue to grow. And I think that's especially true when we think about bringing new technologies on and the speed of doing business. There's always going to be things to learn and adjust and to adapt to. So how can leaders continue to develop? By investing in themselves, right? So whether that's through company-sponsored trainings or coaching. I have somebody right now who he sets aside some time and money every year to do some development on his own. So whether that's, a class, continuously listening to like podcasts, reading the books, having conversations with your peer groups and your leaders, all of those are really effective ways. And then also, soliciting feedback is really helpful. Soliciting feedback from your team, especially, asking some of those hard questions or asking some of those things that maybe you're like, I don't want to know the answer. I used to have a manager who did this all the time with the team. Hey, how do you think I handled that call? How do you think the meeting went? And that was how he continued to develop and grow within his role.
Brandy, those are some excellent points. I was curious to know, let's say a leader has made some progress, but they've fallen back into some of their bad boss habits. How do we coach leaders who end up in denial about those bad habits? What do we do in those situations?
I think that's a tough situation. So the question, anytime that I'm entering into a coaching engagement with a client, I always am looking for, is this person self-aware? Is this person coachable? And if the answer is no, then there's not a lot that anyone else can do, right? There has to be some degree of recognition and ownership for themselves. I think a lot of times there's the route of, performance, what's the word I'm looking for? You get on the performance improvement plan and those kinds of things. And certainly that should be a red flag that something's not working. But it's got to start with, hey, I know something's not working. I know I'm contributing to that. Or even maybe I can't control everything, but I can control how I show up for myself and how I show up for my team. And how do I do that better? So there's got to be some, again, self-awareness, some degree of accountability, and coachability.
Excellent points, Brandy. And I wanted to learn more about when a leader makes progress. What are some ways organizations and businesses can measure the progress or the improvement in leadership behaviors?
Oh, 100%. So, you can look at things like productivity on the team. Typically, when there's some bad boss behaviors going on, you'll see it very quickly in performance. You'll see it quickly in how that team is communicating, which of course impacts our deadlines getting met. How is the quality of work? What does turnover look like on that team? And how much money is it costing for us to get projects done? I worked with a client years ago, and they had some pretty significant leadership challenges. And how it was showing up for them in their business was that projects were taking twice as long to get done and costing 20% more. Well, those aren't costs you can pass along to the client. Those are costs that you have to eat. So as these principals of the company were sort of looking at their numbers, that's when they started to ask the questions like, why is this happening? And it was a direct impact of kind of some not great leadership behaviors and how those leadership behaviors impacted culture. So again, looking at turnover numbers, looking at production numbers, all of those things tell a story.
Brandy, those are excellent points. And I'd like to learn more about, let's say someone is becoming a manager for the first time. What advice would you give to that person?
I would tell them to ask a lot of questions to make sure that they knew what is a day in the life, what is a week in the life of someone in this position look like. what will be expected, not only sort of on the more technical side, but what will be expected in terms of the people management side. I would recommend that they get very, very clear on those things that they're bringing to the table that are strengths for them. And I would sort of discourage them from thinking about leadership as being this box, right? That's what a lot of us think, like, okay, if I can just fit into this template, then by golly, I'm going to be the best leader that there is. And the truth is, that's not necessarily the case, right? We all bring ourselves, we bring something special to that role. So identifying that really helps build up confidence and self-trust early in that process. And then looking to the team to sort of manage those things that are weaknesses. And how do you leverage the talents and the strength of your team members so that you're effective as a whole? I would also tell new leaders, like, know what your support channels are. I have people make a list, make a list of all the people that you call when you need a cheerleader, when you need a support person, when you need an advocate, whether it's internal, external, so that you can have those people on speed dial when you hit those. Management's very rewarding. It can be very rewarding. It can also be like really hard and daunting and draining on your soul. So you need to have that support network in place.
Brandy, those are great points. And I'd like to learn more about your journey, especially when it comes to breaking the bad boss pattern. I was curious to learn more. Tell me about a time when there was a leader or a manager that you found really challenging, and overcoming those obstacles. What was that like when you just witnessed these, when you witnessed this process?
Oh my gosh. So I think for me, my story is really painful because I actually started my career in an organization where I had nothing but good bosses. So I didn't realize how lucky I was until I went to a different company. And I really struggled. There was one person who it was really hard. And, she displayed a lot of these bad boss behaviors, this micromanagement, sort of sabotaging. And we had a lot of conflict in our relationship. So we didn't really trust each other. And it was very, very difficult for us to work together. Over time, I began to see where some of her behaviors were coming from. And they were coming from a place of high pressure from the company president. They were coming from a place of, she was very fearful of making a mistake or looking bad. And that really showed up in how she treated other people. So once I kind of understood that, and I was able to come to that relationship with a little bit more empathy and with an eye on sort of managing up, that was really helpful. I'm not going to lie. We were never like holding hands and singing Kumbaya, but we at least got to a place of being able to communicate effectively and work together in a meaningful way.
Wow, what a story. Brandy, reflecting back on your journey, as you develop yourself as a leader, what is something that you wish you had known in the early stages of your leadership career?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's a hard question to answer because there's a lot that I wish I would have known. I wish that I would have understood that the job of management and the job of leadership is not just about checking the boxes, right? And the further you advance in leadership, the more that the role becomes about your relationships. I wish someone would have told me that. And I wish someone would have helped me practice patience a little more. Yeah. So again, learning things, we all have them. But that's part of the management and the leadership transition, right? It's no different than any other position in terms of you have to learn what those things are.
Brandy, those are great insights. And question about the leaders who do slip into these bad boss patterns. What can they do to restore that sense of psychological safety if they want to rebuild that trust within their team?
Yeah. So the absolute best way to do that is to take ownership and accountability of that behavior. One of the things that I always encourage clients to do when they're struggling and they're taking active measures to, get to a place where they feel more confident and they can perform better. I tell leaders, okay, so we're working on this. You need to tell your team. You need to tell your team this is something that is important to you, that you know you haven't done it great in the past, but you care about your performance, you care about the team, and so you're taking these measures to do a better job. And you can even enlist the help of your team, like, hey, if you guys see me engaging in XYZ behavior, call me out. Like, I'm giving you permission. I want your support in this, and make the team a part of your growth. That's a really effective way to kind of rebuild some of that trust.
That's a great point. And there was some research that I pulled into this field, and actually want to get your thoughts on this. This comes from Harris Poll, and they discovered that 31% of employees currently work under a toxic boss. What steps should they take to navigate those challenges?
The employees? What steps should the employees take? Yeah. So, I think it depends on what the level of psychological safety is within that team. Ideally, that direct report, that employee would be able to go to their manager and say, hey, look, I like being a part of this team. I care about how we work together. Let me tell you what I'm seeing. And then be constructive, right? Use a feedback model like the SBI model or something like that, which is situation, behavior, and impact. But something that kind of takes a little bit of that emotion out of it and keeps it somewhat objective. And just say, here's the behaviors I'm seeing, and here's how they're impacting me, and here's how they're impacting the team. And how can I support you, or how can we take a step forward together to address these so that we can perform better?
That's right. Those are great insights, Brandy. And I know you had written a book. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've actually written 2 books. My first book is called Own It, and it's all about accountability, right? It's all about, when those hard moments when something doesn't go right, and that it's because you didn't do your part, right? Or you missed something, which happens. We're all human, but being able to actually take ownership of that. The second book, which is called Spark, How Great Leaders Start, that is a great sort of how-to manual for people who are coming into people leadership for the first time. So it really talks about finding your brand as a leader. It talks about dealing with the very common challenges and pitfalls of, being new in leadership. It talks about developing relationships with your teams and the people that you work with. So I highly, highly recommend it. And that book was written based on my own experiences in coaching consulting, but I also interviewed, over 50 people in human resources, in leadership, in management, to kind of pull all these insights together.
Speaking of which, you did create a framework called Spark. Is that an acronym? Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so it's a communication tool, and it's really meant to be like fast, in the moment, creating expectations, having in the moment feedback conversation. So the acronym is S is for set expectations, which of course everything starts with that. P is for purpose, or the why. A stands for action, which in this case, action means having a follow-up, like a check-in conversation. And then R is for real-time feedback and coaching. So if you're already checking in, that's ideal time to offer some feedback or some coaching. And then K stands for keep it going, right? So it's a process, and if used effectively and consistently, it keeps everything very clear. It keeps communication flowing, and it kind of keeps everybody on the same page, and allows managers to see things when they're little things before stuff gets really off track and it becomes huge and it's a big fire that has to be put out. So it allows managers to do that feedback and coaching, pretty early on in the process, and in doing that, develops that trust in those relationships as well.
Brandy, I was curious to learn more about the inspiration behind the acronym Spark. Was there a story behind that?
I just like that, because to me, Spark is like, that's the thing that gets you going. That's like the exciting thing that like pushes you from where you are now to where you want to go. And that's why I use that word so much, because to me, it means action. To me, it means lighting your passion and lighting your fire and using that in a positive way.
Excellent. And Brandy, before we wrap up, what is the best way for people to reach you should they want to learn more about you and the work you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can find me on LinkedIn for sure, Brandy Ferrer. Also, check out Pathfinder Strategies, which is pathfinder-strategies.com. There's all kinds of really great stuff about our programming and just what we do and our philosophy there.
Excellent. And Brandy, before we go, what is your final piece of wisdom for our audience?
Oh my gosh. So I'll leave with this. According to Gallup, only 10% of people are natural leaders. And that means the rest of us need all the help we can get. So let's help each other and let's support each other in this process, because leaders have such a tremendous impact, not only on the people that they work with, but on their cultures. They impact the things that people take home, and they impact their communities. So let's make that a positive impact.
Brandy, that is an excellent piece of wisdom. And thank you again for really sharing your insights and perspectives on today's episode. Really enjoyed learning about this concept of the bad boss patterns, their habits, what we can do to really pay attention to the process and really promoting others to higher levels, and what we can do to really help them overcome those challenges when they slip into those habits. And to everyone out there, thank you again for tuning in. If you picked up some great takeaways, please feel free to share this conversation with other leaders. And Brandy, once again, thank you so much. To everyone out there, thank you for tuning in. I'll see you in the next episode.
Awesome. Thanks, Jessper. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Brandy.